Hey guys, we're in week 4 of our Uncharted journey. I pray that this season has been great for you and your family as you just have been wrestling with God and asking Him to speak to you and take you to new places in every area of what it looks like for you to follow Jesus. This week, as we were looking at the life of Abraham, we're looking at what is probably the most unusual story in Abraham's life, one of the most unusual stories in the whole Bible, super odd, super hard for us to even think about. And at the same time, it's one of the most powerful stories of faith that we can even consider. And so the context is God has spoken to Abraham and asked him to sacrifice his son Isaac. It's this giant test. And so here we see Genesis 22, verse 3, early the next morning. So Abraham responds and he sets out to obey. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey, while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Those last little words to me are the most powerful words in this story for me personally, where he tells the servants, hey, Isaac and I are going to go over there and we will both come back to you. It's this picture of Abraham's faith. Even though he's received this message to go and sacrifice Isaac, he has this incredible faith that I think is really rooted in everything that we've seen in this whole story leading up to this moment. It's really rooted in this promise. God had given Abraham this promise that he was going to have this great nation, and the great nation was going to come through Isaac. And so because Abraham was so familiar with God's promises to him, and specifically about Isaac, he had this great faith that one way or another, him and Isaac were going to come back because of what God had spoken to him in his promise. And I think that it's important to recognize that Abraham was used to hearing God's voice. He had these multiple encounters where God had spoken to him clearly, and all the way into this one moment where he has this encounter with this guy named Melchizedek, who was the king of Salem, and Salem literally means peace. He was the king of peace. Most theologians believe this is what's called a Christophany, an Old Testament appearance of the pre-incarnate Christ. It's Jesus making a cameo in the Old Testament, and he has this moment where he literally has bread and wine with Jesus. He takes communion with Jesus before anyone else would in the New Testament or in the era of the church. And so he's used to God's presence. He's used to God's voice. So when God speaks to him, he knows what his voice sounds like. I think a third thing that really was informing Abraham's incredible faith in this moment is he'd seen God's power over and over and over again. He'd seen God's power displayed, and even in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, he had this tangible experiential knowledge that God is powerful, which I love how Hebrews 11 talks about this story, talking about Abraham. It says, by faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. So it's that promise thing. And then Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. See, what we really see in this story is Abraham knew the character of God, this God that had made promises to him, this God that had been faithful to keep those promises to him, even the birth of Isaac, even though they were super old, this God who had shown himself powerful, that he knew the character of God, which allowed him to live the kind of life that few people live. It's a life where nothing's off limits to God. So when God asked Abraham to do the unthinkable, when God asked Abraham to give up the thing that mattered most to him, his only son, nothing was off limits to God because he knew God's character, he knew God's voice, he knew God's promises. He knew God's power. And so it enabled him to have this faith that we can't even wrap our heads around. This faith to kind of live this open-handed life where nothing's off limits. And I wonder this week if we were to ask the Lord, maybe in relationship to our generosity, but maybe in relationship to a relationship, maybe in relationship to what you're doing for a living, maybe in relationship to a habit. Is there something in my life that has been off limits to God, that he might speak to me and that he might give me the faith, give us the faith so that we can live a life where nothing's off limits because we know God's character and we know his goodness towards us, that it might allow us to live with that kind of faith where we say nothing's off limits to you, God.
I've been a part of LifeChurch for the past 17 years, and during that time, I've seen us grow from Galena High School to where we are now, and God's showing up. So as we started on this Uncharted journey, as this Uncharted initiative, it reminded me of the very first initiative that LifeChurch did called L3. And it was in that time that I was challenged for the very first time on what is generosity? What does it look like to give sacrificially? And at that time, I was 19, 20 years old, living on a college budget, basically, working two to three jobs at the time, just making ends meet. But it was there that God challenged me of what is it you are giving towards? How are you showing your generosity? And I was challenged for the very first time that even though I didn't have much, I could give to move God's kingdom. And so in that time, I started tithing and I started giving to God what was his and what he had blessed me with. It wasn't a lot, but I knew that God was going to use it to move his kingdom forward. And I've gotten to see that happen through L3, through the Elevate initiative, as we built the kids building and as we built our campus in South Reno, is God has moved. And that started with people giving sacrificially, of saying, I believe God is going to do a lot with the resources that we have here. And so I started giving sacrificially. I started giving what I could, but I knew God was doing something, and he did something in me in that time to where he grew me, and I became the student pastor 11 years ago, working with middle school students. And since then, I have seen God show up time and time again. And so as I look forward to this Uncharted journey, I am excited to see what is God going to challenge me with now. My circumstances have changed, but I know God wants more of me. And so I know I'm going to give sacrificially, both with my time, with my service, and with my finances. And I believe God's going to use that to grow me in faith and trust and remembering who he is. Uncharted means to me of taking a step of faith in all areas of my life, where as I've been praying and thinking through this, and me and Lydia have been talking, it is a hold nothing back journey. Give everything to God that he has blessed me with. And kind of the word that has been said over me is kind of this full send mentality, that I'm gonna send it all. I'm gonna give it all to God. And so that looks like in finances, that I'm looking at how can me and Lydia give more than ever to the church, to the community, so that we can reach more people that are lost. How is it that we can give more time and service on what we're able to do than ever? And I think it's this idea of we're gonna hold nothing back. It's a faith journey of God calling us into the unknown. And so I want to be like, as we've been reading through Abraham, of being like Abraham as he leaves what he has known behind to step into new places. And that's what me and Lydia are looking at, is what does it look like for us to grow in this faith and trust of who God is?